7 Days to Die. Chapter 1. Outbreak. Alex's eyes snapped open to the sound of distant screams. For a moment he just laid there, gaze fixed on the dark ceiling of his bedroom as his brain tried to make sense of the noises filtering through his window. Screams weren't an unusual nighttime occurrence in his suburban neighborhood. Bored teenagers often got up to no good after the sun went down. But something about these screams seemed more frantic, more terrified than normal. Swinging his legs over the side of the bed, Alex walked to the window and peered outside. His breath caught in his throat. Mrs. Patterson from down the street was stumbling down the middle of the road, clad in nothing but a blood-spattered nightgown. Even from a distance, Alex could see the crazed, vacant look in her eyes. This was no bored prank. Something was horribly wrong. The screams were growing louder now, echoing between the darkened houses. Alex watched in horror as more shadowy figures emerged onto the road. Some limped awkwardly, others scuttled on all fours. Their erratic movements and chilling moans made his skin crawl. Alex's mind raced. Was it drugs? Rabies? Some kind of riots? Nothing seemed to explain the nightmarish scene unfolding outside. He knew he had to get out of there fast. Throwing on jeans, boots, and a jacket, Alex crammed a duffel bag with non-perishable food, bottles of water, and his trusty baseball bat. He surveyed his house, wondering if he'd ever see it again. Memories flashed through his mind: birthday parties, holidays, summer barbecues. A pang of grief hit him. But the eerie howls from nearby forced him to shake off the sadness. He had to survive first, mourn later. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped outside into the chaos. Chapter 2. The Remnant. Alex stuck to the shadows, ducking behind parked cars whenever he encountered one of the shrieking, deranged people wandering the streets. Up close, it looked like something out of a horror movie: bloody wounds, ripped clothes, vacant eyes, and violent snarls. He couldn't bring himself to believe they had once been his friendly neighbors. Avoiding Main Street, where the bulk of the madness seemed centered, Alex cut through backyards towards the edge of town. The factories and warehouses in the industrial zone were likely abandoned at this hour. If he could just get that far, he could regroup and plan his next move. He was nearly clear of his neighborhood when a nearby crashing noise made him jump. Peering over a fence, he saw a hulking figure use a garden gnome to smash a window on the side of a house. It then crawled into the new opening on all fours. Alex's stomach turned as he realized whoever lived there was in grave danger. But what could he do against this growing mob? Jaw clenched with frustration, he turned away. The scene was much the same as Alex crept from shadow to shadow through the empty streets of downtown. Smashed cars, debris strewn about, unnatural figures loping in the darkness. A few times they seemed to catch his scent and began shambling toward his hiding spot, but he managed to evade them. Just a few more blocks. The factories were so close now, one with a faded Taylor manufacturing sign. Reaching the complex's gated parking lot, Alex pulled himself over and crouched behind a dumpster, catching his breath. The jumble of warehouses and smokestacks loomed around him, but no crazed people were in sight. For the first time since he woke up to this nightmare, Alex felt a tiny flicker of relief. At least here, he could rest and think. A faint clicking noise from the shadows put him instantly on alert again. Gripping his bat tight, Alex squinted into the darkness. A human shape stumbled into a shaft of moonlight. Alex was winding up to swing when he heard a familiar voice. "Wait, it's me," the figure said, hands raised. Stepping forward, The moonlight revealed Mike, a kid Alex recognized from school. Mike? Alex lowered the bat. What the hell is happening? What are those things? I have no idea, man. Everything went insane so fast, Mike said, breathing hard like he'd been running for his life. 1 second, the neighborhood was quiet. The next, people were getting attacked by their own parents, kids, everyone. Alex shook his head in disbelief. Why come here, though? I saw you sneaking through the backyards and decided to follow you. Safety in numbers, right? Mike said. Alex nodded. He was right. Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one left. We'll hole up in this factory and... Alex started before a grinding noise cut him off. One of the large warehouse doors was sliding open. Alex braced himself for another fight, but relaxed slightly as he made out the shapes of other humans slipping outside. Mike waved and called out to them. Hey, over here, it's Mike and Alex from down the street. The figures hurried over. Alex recognized many of them from around town. An older man with a ragged beard spoke first. Well, I'll be damned. More survivors. Get inside quick, before any of those things notice you. The man introduced himself as Lawrence, while the rest of the group shared their names. Emily, Javier, Brandon, Tammy. There were about a dozen of them who had apparently had the same idea as Mike and Alex to take shelter in one of the abandoned factories. We've got some food, water, and weapons stored up, Lawrence said, locking the heavy door behind them. It ain't much, but it's better than being out in that mess. Alex took a deep breath and looked around. Their hideout wasn't much to look at, the grimy concrete floors, littered with old machinery and dust-covered shelves. But it had 4 sturdy walls, a roof, and people who weren't trying to kill each other. For now, it would do. What are we gonna call ourselves? Mike asked. Lawrence scratched his beard thoughtfully. How about the Remnant, since we're just a leftover fragment of people still alive? Alex gazed at the tired, frightened faces around him in the dim light. They were teachers, landscapers, store clerks, mechanics. No military or survival training. But here they were, thrown together and surviving against the odds. The Remnant. I like it. Chapter 3. Ghost Town Scavenging. Alex awoke curled up on a mattress on the cold factory floor, a ratty blanket pulled up to his chin. For a brief moment, the nightmare of the previous night felt far away. Then the snores and stirrings of the other Remnant members on nearby mattresses jolted him back to the harsh new reality. Sitting up with a groan, Alex took stock of their makeshift shelter in the daylight streaming through the windows. The wooden shelves that weren't totally rotted held their meager food supplies: canned soups and beans, protein bars, bottles of water. A dozen sleeping bags and blankets were scattered across the floor. In the far corner stood a crude toilet made from a plastic bucket. It wasn't glamorous, but they were alive. For now. Glancing at his watch, Alex felt a twinge of anxiety. Based on their supplies, they had enough food and water to last maybe a week, and that was rationing tightly. They needed more gear if they were going to survive whatever this thing was. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and canned peaches, Alex cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. All right, folks, we've got the basics here, but not enough to live on long term. I think we need to start scavenging the towns around us before others get the same idea. There were nods and murmurs of assent. With heavy hearts and rifles in hand, they split up into smaller search groups to cover more ground. Alex paired up with Sarah, a quick-witted EMT training to be a paramedic, and they headed west towards the small rural town of Cedar Hills. As they slipped through the tree line into town, they found the streets deserted, shops and homes eerily empty. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of roads. It looked like everyone had dropped what they were doing and fled all at once. It made the hairs on Alex's neck stand up, knowing some of them were likely the same crazed people now roaming near the factory. "This is so creepy," Sarah whispered. Alex nodded. They aimed for practical targets, first to the hardware store for tools and batteries, the pharmacy for medical supplies, the small grocery for food and water. Loading backpacks and tote bags with their haul, they continued down the main strip. Passing a looted clothing shop, Sarah paused. Eyeing a flowing floral dress on a mannequin in the shattered window, she said, "We need more than just survival gear to stay human, you know." She ducked inside and emerged wearing the dress, smiling shyly. Alex couldn't help but smile back. It reminded him there was more to live for than just sustenance. As the sun dipped low, they hurried back through the trees, bags heavy with supplies. They'd survived their first day in this terrifying new world. Alex didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but with Sarah by his side, he felt ready to face it. Chapter 4: The First Siege. Over the next few days, the Remnant settled into a routine of supply runs, taking turns venturing farther out to stockpile what they could. Food, medicine, fuel, tools, weapons. They grabbed anything useful in the growing ghost towns. At the factory itself, they reinforced the exterior gates with chains, parked vehicles, and razor wire. The motion-activated floodlights out front gave them extra security at night when the crazed infected liked to roam. Watch shifts were established, so someone was always manning the fence or monitoring the cameras Lawrence had rigged up inside. Nights were the worst, lying awake listening to the unearthly moans carry from nearby streets. During the day, the infected seemed to withdraw to darker hideouts, making the supply runs possible. Everyone noticed their numbers and ferocity appeared to be growing rapidly, though. Time was not on the Remnant's side. On the fifth night, Alex woke from an uneasy sleep to the sound of yelling. Throwing on shoes and grabbing his rifle, he sprinted outside. In the glare of the floodlights, he saw a huge mass of infected crowded against the outer gate, clawing and throwing themselves against it. Lawrence and the others were already at the fence firing shots over the top to push the horde back with limited effect. These were not individuals. They moved and acted almost as one single ferocious entity. "There's too many," Emily yelled over the noise. "The gate won't hold much longer." She was right. The metal creaked under the strain as more joined the crushing swarm. Alex knew they had to be strategic. Ignore the ones at the gate. Focus firepower on thinning out the newcomers at the back. We have to stem the flow. The Remnant adjusted their aim, dropping the newly arriving infected in a steady barrage of bullets. For every one they killed, 2 more seemed to take its place, but it was the only chance they had. After brutal hours of non-stop shooting and evacuating to the fallback point near the building entrance, the floodlights began revealing more pavement than bodies. The horde at the gate was still sizable, but no longer growing. Their ammo supply, however, was dwindling fast. As dawn's light crept over the horizon, the Remnant watched in disbelief as the remaining infected growled in frustration and shuffled away from the gate. Their human prey was still tantalizingly close, but now out of reach behind barriers they seemed unable to breach. For today, at least. Everyone knew this shelter was now only a temporary reprieve. Collapsing from exhaustion, the Remnant started tending to their injured, tallying their losses and fortifying for the next inevitable onslaught. They had survived their first siege, but just barely. Alex met Sarah's eyes from across the courtyard. No words needed to be said. If they stayed here, they would die. It was time to start fighting back. Chapter 5. Seeking Allies. The next day, the Remnant held a meeting to discuss next steps. They couldn't just wait around for another attack. Their ammo was running low, and the building had structural damage. But where could they go that would be any safer? Alex cleared his throat. I was thinking last night, there must be others out there like us, survivors who banded together in shelters or camps, maybe even some military holdouts or government safe zones. Mentioning the government and military made their situation feel suddenly more hopeful. Emily nodded eagerly. He's right, strength in numbers. If we could join up with other groups, we'd stand a better chance of fighting back, she said. This stirred excited agreement among the group. Sarah looked thoughtful. To find allies, we'll have to search farther than we have before, and move beyond the areas we know those things roam. Alex met her eyes and knew they were thinking the same thing. They had run out of safe options. Their only chance was to take the risk. Over the next 2 days, the Remnant prepared vehicles for long-distance travel. Trucks and vans were loaded up with gas cans, food, ammo. Anything they couldn't carry from their factory shelter was reluctantly abandoned. On a cold gray morning, engines roared to life, and the convoy pulled through the twisted outer gate onto the unknown road ahead. As the shelter disappeared from sight in the rearview mirror, Alex steeled himself. Either they would find help out there, or die trying. The first few towns held no signs of life. Anything useful was scavenged from the ghostly streets for their own supply. But as they reached the outskirts of Bridgeton on the third day, they spotted a thin tendril of smoke rising from a chimney. Their hearts leapt. Approaching cautiously, they found a property ringed by haphazard scrap metal fencing with figures moving behind it. Manning the barricades with rifles were 4 men with hard, wary eyes. After a tense moment, their leader called out, "Come any closer and we'll shoot. This here's our stronghold." Lawrence slowly raised his hands. "We don't want trouble, friend, just looking for survivors to join up with." The man eyed their makeshift convoy, considering. Finally he said, "Fine, but no funny business. We've got pureblood kids here." Inside the crude bunker, they found a dozen hollow-eyed survivors and a few dirty, whimpering children. They had some food and weapons, but nowhere near enough ammo or people to combat the growing infected threat. They welcomed the Remnant's arrival with tears of joy and agreed to travel together, seeking more survivors. In this ruthless new world, they would need to band together or die alone. Alex glanced at Sarah, knowing they had made the right choice. Out here, hope was fragile, but it still flickered. Chapter 6. The Road. Traveling in convoy with the new survivors was slow but steady progress. Stopping each night near resource-rich locations, they would forage during the day, then pull vehicles into a circle at defensible positions to camp, wary always for threats from infected and desperate folk alike. 5 days and they came across an apartment building fortified with sandbags. Rifle barrels poked over the rim as they approached. A voice called down, "Keep moving, nothing for you here." Javier stepped forward, hands raised. "Please, we have women and children too, strengthen numbers against those things." After tense negotiation, they were reluctantly allowed inside. Another day they woke to find 2 vehicles stolen in the night by a band of raiders. Fuel, food, ammo gone. It was a harsh reminder other survivors would be friend or foe. Nowhere was truly safe out here. Whenever possible, they stopped at police stations and hunter supply shops to stock up on guns and ammo. Medical clinics and pharmacies provided antibiotics and other essential medications. Fuel was always the first thing taken when siphoning supply from abandoned cars. Food was scarcest. Canned goods from stores were rapidly dwindling as they moved farther from towns. Hunting meant noise that drew infected. They ate whatever birds or squirrels the snipers could silently take down. Hunger was a constant gnawing companion. At night around the fire, spirits were kept alive by stories shared and psalms sung, laughter squeezing out momentary joy. The old world felt far away, sitting around these crackling flames under the stars. For all the horrors, trust and camaraderie had grown within the group. On the 15th night, their perimeter alarm was triggered by shuffling footsteps. But it was two young children, faces gaunt, clothes tattered, drawn by the light and laughter. No words needed to be spoken as they were welcomed into the fold. This was life on the road now in this lawless apocalyptic world. Brief moments of hope and humanity contrasted by stark brutality and loss. But they continued putting one foot in front of the other, seeking refuge they prayed still existed somewhere up ahead. Eyes weary but resolute, their will to survive drove them forward. Chapter 7: New Blood. A month on the road brought the Remnant convoy and their allies to a sprawling military base outside the city of Fairview. Guard towers and fences still stood intact, giving them hope of finding personnel and supplies within. But as they neared the barricaded gate, faces pressed against chain link revealed the men inside were no soldiers. Lawrence slowed the truck and leaned out the window, hand raised in greeting. "We come in peace, no trouble here, looking for refuge. Thought this base could provide it." One of the men, scar-faced with a jagged mohawk, ambled to the fence. "Refuge'll cost you. Food, meds, ammo. Then we'll consider letting you in." The rest grinned eagerly, guns cocked. Lawrence shook his head. "We've got women and children here with us, please. Where's your humanity?" The man spat. "Don't matter now. It's every group for themselves. Pay the toll or move along." He raised his rifle threateningly. With heavy hearts, the convoy pulled back onto the road, leaving the militarized stronghold behind. Finding allies would not be as simple as they had hoped. 2 days later, on a supply run in the ghost suburbs of Fairview, they came across a house with a tattered HELP banner hanging from a balcony. Approaching slowly, an elderly couple emerged. Too old and frail to fight, but wise and full of spirit. Their knowledge proved valuable around the evening fires. It was these elders who shared rumors overheard on their radio before it died. Hushed whispers of a resistance movement forming to the north. Ex-military and police banding at some fortress. Vague and unconfirmed, but it was the first concrete hope they had grasped. New members brought new complications, though. 2 weeks in, a teenage boy was caught stealing rations for himself. When confronted, he lashed out violently. They could not allow selfishness to fracture their unity, and regretfully he was left behind on the road. Hard choices weighed on their conscience. Nights later, 2 young siblings crept into their perimeter, drawn by the firelight. Orphaned and trembling, they were readily embraced into the fold. The shy girl blossomed under Sarah's wing. Watching them filled Alex's heart with tenderness, but also dread. How many were still out there alone? They couldn't save everyone. Roving threats grew more dangerous as they pushed north through contested lands. Raider gangs became bolder, making runs on the convoy under cover of night. 2 vehicles were lost before they learned to form a tighter circle. Some urged abandoning the non-fighters, slowing them down. Leadership disagreed. Their humanity mattered most. On one rare occasion, they arrived at a survivor camp in time to help them fight off an infected swarm descending under the blood moon's glow. Fighting side by side forged powerful bonds between the groups. This new contingent brought mechanics and farmers, adding to their skills. Each new person expanded their capabilities, but also brought more mouths to feed, more opinions into the mix. A clash over rationing nearly led to violence before calm heads prevailed. Patience and wisdom was needed to manage the diverse personalities. The only way forward was together. As the next blood moon approached, the Remnant convoy rumbled down rural backroads far from the cities now. Seeking shelter and unsure who to trust, but also stronger, wiser, and more united, having survived the road this long. How much further could they go? Chapter 8: The Prison. The landscape grew wilder as the convoy ventured into deeply rural areas. Gone were the suburban homes and stores. Now it was winding roads through dense woods and fields stretching to the horizon. With no heaven in sight, morale was dipping low. It was Tammy who first spotted the steeple poking above the trees and shouted with excitement. An old church. Locating a winding driveway overgrown with weeds, they followed it to reveal a massive walled compound anchored by a church. Hope lifted their spirits. Sanctuary at last. But as the vehicles approached the sagging chain-link gate, it became clear this was no holy sight. Coils of razor wire lined the tops of high concrete walls. Guard towers stood sentinel over the imposing grounds. Not a church, a prison. Long abandoned based on the state of disrepair. They cut the chains and entered cautiously in groups, weapons ready for guards or infected. But the prison stood eerily empty, paint peeling, some walls tagged with graffiti. In the sizable cafeteria, they found rations and supplies to sustain them weeks if rationed wisely. Better yet, the walls were solid concrete and the cells secure. With some repairs, this fortress could become their strongest hold yet against the growing zombie masses. By nightfall, they had cleared one cell block and begun discussing plans. A rare sense of hope filled the musty air. Over the next week, the Remnant worked urgently to transform the grounds. Inmates from before the outbreak had left crude graffiti and artifacts. Alex tried not to imagine what violent men had lived inside these cramped cells, focusing only on the safety their stout walls provided. Some argued over who should get the cells versus dorm bunks. Leadership settled disputes calmly to maintain order. Cammy and the cooks transformed the old industrial kitchen to feed the masses. A true stronghold was taking shape. Outside, teams chopped down trees to form barricades, reinforced fences, filled holes with barbed wire. With the mechanics' help, doors were welded shut or rigged with alarms. Escape tunnels were discovered and sealed off. The time till next blood moon was a rapidly ticking clock. Watch shifts were assigned to all able fighters. Armed sentries kept vigil atop the guard towers day and night. As the sand in the hourglass drained, the missing piece of their plan was becoming clear. Enough bodies to defend the perimeter they were strengthening with such care. New faces had to be brought into the fold soon, or all this would be for nothing. On a quiet midnight walk atop the walls, Alex voiced his concern to Sarah as they kept watch side by side. She interlaced her fingers with his and spoke with firm resolve. Have faith. We didn't make it this far just to fail now. The people we need will arrive exactly when they're meant to. Keep your eyes to the horizon. Chapter 9. Calm before the storm. The final day before the next full blood moon brought an eerie stillness across the prison grounds. No supply runs were scheduled, no unnecessary exposure. The time had come to hunker down and wait out the storm. Last repairs and preparations were urgently completed in a race against the setting sun. Galley staff prepared vats of hearty stews. Medics checked sterile kits were fully stocked. Mechanics topped off gasoline reserves for the night ahead. An electric charge was in the air alongside the dread. As the sinking orange sun painted the high walls, Alex climbed a guard tower to survey their stronghold. Cinder block buildings hunkered down inside layers of razor wire. Armed sentries paced concrete parapets, eyes vigilant for threats. In the failing light, even he had to admit this looked like a place unbreachable. Climbing down, he made his way towards the cell block most heavily fortified where the children and elderly would shelter. Along the way, he passed familiar faces now dear to him. Mike joking with Brandon to release nervous tension. Cammy embracing the kids, soothing their fears. Doc handing out last doses of sedatives to those too anxious to rest. In the cramped cell block, he checked in with Sarah and Emily, who would keep guard over the vulnerable groups overnight. Their determined eyes betrayed their fear, but Alex knew no one he'd trust more with those lives. Brief warmth filled him seeing the community they'd managed to build within these grim walls. At the main gate, Lawrence was observing the armor reinforcements and kill zones they'd set up in overlapping fields of fire. He met Alex's eyes and nodded solemnly. Whatever came, they were as ready as they could be. Their fate now lay in the hands of a higher power. Night fell, scattering stars across the darkening sky. A hush fell over the prison. Tomorrow would bring bloodshed and terror, but tonight, in this moment of calm, Alex allowed himself a slimmer of hope. They'd made it so far against all odds already. Perhaps one more miracle was not too much to pray for. Chapter 10. Blood Moon Siege. A blood-red sunrise seeped over the treetops as the remnants of night's calm shattered under bone-chilling howls. The siege had begun. Hordes of infected poured from the woods in a ravenous tide. Gunfire cracked and muzzle flashes lit up the pre-dawn fog, cloaking the grassy killing field outside the fences. Massed bodies fell and were trampled. But for each one cut down, more lunged forward to take their place. From his aerial perch, Alex rained hot lead into the surging hordes. Adrenaline drowned his fear and exhaustion. The hours and weeks of preparation had led to this moment. Failure was not an option now. As the sun rose higher and burned off the fog, the true epic scale of their enemy became gut-wrenchingly clear. The horde extended past the tree lines, a seething insectoid mass flooding towards the concrete walls that stood as the last fragile dike holding back this undead sea. Their ammunition caches were rapidly dwindling under this relentless assault. Some weapons fell silent as their handlers ran out of bullets and grabbed spares from the fallen. The dead were piling in a gruesome rampart around the perimeter. Still, they kept coming. A rasping battle cry arose from thousands of undead throats as the horde surged forward overtop their own dead. They hit the barricades like a tsunami, clawing up and over the chain link. The second line of defense was now in play. Alex ran along the interior parapets yelling fire commands as they brought mortars and Molotov cocktails raining down into the courtyards between fence layers. Rotting bodies burst into flames that spread hungrily. The air grew noxious with the stench of burnt flesh. As the day wore on, the defenders came to dread the low whistling sound that signaled a mortar team was dry. Their ammo and gasoline was fading fast. With their dwindling arsenal, keeping the flood at bay seemed impossible. The fate they had worked so hard to avoid was crashing down. When the call arose from the north wall that the horde had broken through the perimeter there, a cry of anguish went up. There was no fallback plan after this last fortress. The end had come at last. Fighters embraced their loved ones as the setting sun's rays went blood red. Just then, a droning buzz arose in the smoke-choked air. Murmurs of confusion turned to cheers of elation as sleek helicopters crested the trees. Reinforcements had arrived at last. Alex's heart swelled with dizzying euphoria and relief. The razor rain of automated chain gun fire and missiles thinned the horde's massed ranks while fighters regained their will to survive. The tide was turning. The defenders roared with renewed primal fury. As sunlight faded into twilight, the prison still stood blood-soaked but unbroken. Their faith had been rewarded. Though the war still stretched on before them, tonight was a hard-won victory worthy of celebration. Chapter 11. Unlikely Allies. A wave of raucous cheering went up as boots hit the ground and the new arrivals approached the gate. Heavily armed and outfitted for war, the way they carried themselves marked them as ex-military, even without their mottled fatigues. These were the allies they had so desperately hoped for. As Alex watched them enter, he felt the knotted tension that had sat between his shoulder blades for weeks finally ease. However bad things got out here, knowing they weren't totally alone in this fight lifted a weight from his spirit. One of the men approached Alex and Lawrence, nodding respectfully to them. "Name's Barker, ex-Army. Heard your people's broadcasts on the radio past few weeks. Took a bit to convince Command something big was happening out here. Glad we made it when we did." "You have impeccable timing, sir," Alex said with a tired grin. As the convoy and its precious supplies rolled in, the newcomers were greeted warmly and introduced around. Having weathered the long, brutal siege together, Alex saw even longtime feuds and rivalries within their group dissolve in the glow of this victory and relief. They were bonded now beyond all that. In the casualty tent, medics readied for the influx of wounded being carried in. A line of fighters patiently awaited treatment or consolation for their losses. Inside, Alex found Sarah tending to the elderly couple they had brought into their fold, her eyes sunken with fatigue, but hands working steadily, determinedly, to mend their battered bodies. Not all had come through unscathed. By the main gate, the grizzled Barker surveyed the scene with a look of newfound respect. "Well, I've built something incredible out here, a level of trust and cooperation folks said was impossible now. Got more heart and grit than any unit I served with." Alex and Lawrence exchanged proud smiles. As the blood moon rose that night, for the first time its baleful light held no fear over the compound. Fires blazed in iron drums as an air of celebration warmed the cool night. The storytellers regaled their new allies with how the Remnant came to be. Laughter and songs floated on the breeze. Bellies were filled and wounds tended. They had earned this bright, burning moment of joy. Alex found Sarah alone on the parapets gazing up at the night sky. No words needed to be spoken to understand the solace they both found in this glimpse of stars and Inke cosmos stretching eternal behind the haze of smoke still rising from the day's carnage. Some things endured beyond all this. Love, awe, hope. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. Dawn's light revealed the full extent of the epic battle's aftermath. A new landscape lay before the prison's walls now. The grassy fields were churned to muddy wasteland, the ground carpeted by a layer of motionless, rotting forms. The incomprehensible scale of it all turned Alex's stomach. Cleanup crews donned gloves and masks to begin the monumental task of clearing the dead from their perimeter. The magnitude of this gruesome labor weighed heavy on their hearts, but it had to be done to defend against disease. The bodies fed roaring bonfires day and night. By week's end, the clinically burned and dismembered remains were shoveled into mass graves trenches. Bulldozers pushed soil over top as a light rain fell, moistening the churned earth. Some felt moved to say a few words before each solemn burial. With heads bowed, a chapter was laid to rest. Within the infirmary, the cruelty of survival was brought into stark focus. Beds overflowed with the wounded and dying. Agonized cries echoed off concrete walls. Those who made it owed their lives to the tireless medics, but survivors guilt-gnawed at them. Alex stood by helpless as Sarah changed bandages on a boy, not even 10, whom they had pulled from a car wreck months back. His small, broken body now corrupted by fever and trauma. And still he fought on, not ready to leave this world behind. But it was a battle he would ultimately lose. In the courtyard, 3 wooden crosses were erected and adorned with wildflowers. A spiritual ceremony brought together the diverse members of the convoy to honor those lost in the fight. Old divisions and grudges now seemed pointless when confronted with how suddenly life could be snatched away. The cooks prepared a memorial meal from their dwindling rations. Faces once familiar sat now forever absent when Alex gazed across the crowded mess hall. Shared laughter, petty arguments, everyone who had imprinted on his heart had gone. He clung to those remaining seats more fiercely. As the days passed, the outpouring of relief at surviving slowly hardened into grim resolve. This siege had been won, but the war still stretched endlessly ahead. Their ranks were weary and thinned, but unbroken. Eyes lingered on the horizon, already scanning for the next threat to rise. For the newcomers, the horrors of this world had truly sunk in. Baptism by fire. Their mettle was proven now. A fresh breeze swept the smoke's haze from the sky as preparations began for moving onwards. The road's siren call was sounding again. The sanctuary's purpose had been served. It was once more time to leave comfort behind, face the wilderness, and seek their next refuge. Their will hardened like iron. Chapter 13. A New Dawn. The convoy rumbled down a rural highway through dense forest, leaving the prison shrinking in rearview mirrors till it disappeared around a bend. No one spoke as old and new members alike processed the trials endured within those cold concrete walls. It already felt part of the past. Spirits were renewed, having regained strength in numbers. Laughter rang out again around evening fires. But a grim undercurrent ran beneath it. Nights didn't feel as dark with sentries standing vigilant guard. Dawn's light was valued as a gift, not guaranteed. Their worldview was now tempered by chaos witnessed. Passing the 1-month anniversary since the ex-military joined them brought muted reflection. So much had changed from those early panicked days bunkering down, leaving the suburbs for the open road, fraying trust stitching back together. bonds forged and broken, losses etched into their soul as indelible scars. Alex sometimes caught himself longing for the simplicity of their first makeshift factory shelter, before waves of strangers had woven into the fabric of their community, when dangers were still an abstract concept, not held in heartbreaking intimacy. No use dwelling on the past, though. Only the future remained to shape. Whispers circulated of more settlements spotted on the northern horizon. Townships and compounds drawn in the darkness like moths to flame. Contact was dangerous but tantalizing. Resources were scarcer each mile from the denser ruins down south. They needed to reconnect with others who had survived out here. Roving raider gangs became bolder as the miles rolled past. Heavily armed and ruthless, they hit fast for supplies, leaving wakes of destruction behind. Every day the decisions weighed heavier on those tasked with leadership. Alex's mentorship to Sarah and Mike was acknowledged by all now. The reins were passing slowly to new blood. Nights around the fire, elders spoke of peace and virtue, nourishing their humanity. Soldiers recounted war stories that hardened the younger ones. Laughter sprouted from weeds still stubbornly growing through cracks in the asphalt of this scarred world. Moments of grace yet shone if you knew where to look. The cycle spun on, wandering, scavenging, welcoming stragglers into the fold, burying their dead with makeshift words to mark each unique life now lost. This new dawn was colder, crueler than the one they started with. But bright embers yet glowed in hearts they sheltered, blowing fresh hope into. Together they would kindle the flames again. The end.